The question is that this House has considered the withdrawal of copper wire telecommunications networks. Dr. Kofi.
Mr Mandel, it's a huge pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland on securing this debate. It's a really important issue, I think, not just for my constituents, obviously his, but right across the country, particularly thinking of rural communities, but also, as he pointed out, many of our elderly and more vulnerable communities as well. The United Kingdom's embarked on a transformative journey. This departure from traditional copper wire networks have long underpinned the country's communication infrastructure. It's been the backbone of telecommunications, indeed still provides a vital service lifeline for many residents. However, I am conscious that the advent of digital technologies and the exponential growth of data usage have rendered copper wire networks less capable of keeping up with modern day needs. Indeed, it's the copper wire networks have limitations in terms of bandwidth and data capacity, impeding the ability to deliver high-speed internet and also accommodate the increasing data-intensive services demanded by consumers and businesses alike. I'm also very conscious that the withdrawal of copper wire networks is aligned with the UK Government's commitment to nationwide broadband expansion, and it's a crucial component of the country's digital strategy. To ensure that even remote and underserved areas do have access to reliable, high-speed internet. And while this transition holds the promise of improved connectivity and technological advancement, it also raises valid concerns that warrant careful consideration and indeed proactive measures. And so in terms of upgrading the entire infrastructure from copper to fibre optic cables, not only requires substantial investments, it also requires meticulous planning. There are cost implications, there are logistical complexities, and the need for the widespread implementation does raise concerns about the pace and scope of the transition. Now, in this country, we did the digital TV transition very well. It worked exceptionally brilliantly, and it was led by industry. But I should also point out that in my own constituency, if you don't subscribe to internet TV or satellite TV, because a substantial number, particularly the coastal communities, only get access to 15 Freeview channels rather than the plethora that many others do, because they are reliant not on a direct transmitter but on a relay transmitter. And it is that change in service that people have today where they can pick up a phone and dial anywhere in the world. All of a sudden that is going to change, and we should be mindful of not having a worse service for our constituents who choose, for whatever reason, to not have broadband services but still want to be able to have that connection, as I say, around the world. So as the Right Honourable Gentleman has already talked about, bridging the digital divide and preventing communities from being left behind is a really important task, not only for government, but of course for Ofcom and the telecommunication companies themselves. Now, in terms of, I'm very aware that this is an industry-led initiative. It's not actually directly government policy to make this transition, and as I've pointed out, I fully understand why not only BT but other internet companies have decided this is the way to move forward. And I do think that they have been listening. But as the Right Honourable Gentleman said, I think that we've seen increasingly more storms and also longer power outages, and it's those lengthy power cuts that are really worrying people. Indeed, right now, the recommendation to vulnerable communities or vulnerable people is to make sure they have a backup analogue phone that they can plug into the socket in case of these sorts of issues, particularly as more and more people use electronically charged phones and in that regard. So it is concerning to then see how quickly we are getting close to the self-imposed deadline by the industry on this transition. So in terms of, I'm very conscious, and my right honourable friend, the Minister, will know how much mobile phone coverage has expanded since 2010. It's been extraordinary. Number of transmitters, the government's made it easier for those to go up. I'm not aware, of course, directly of the issue specifically in the Right Honourable Gentleman's constituency, but I can imagine that we talk a lot, don't we, of how many places in the country have access to this. And of course, I expect several other people who represent those who don't have quite the same level of access, and we still want to see a fair deal for our constituents. So one of the things I'd like to ask my Right Honourable friend is really to challenge Ofcom about their maps of coverage. I'm conscious that in parts of my constituency it says they're covered, a variety of servers. I just know, thinking out loud, particularly on the Deben Peninsula, whether it's about Sutton or Shottersham and areas like that, who suffered in the storms, were cut off and could not do the things like phoning for an ambulance and similar, unless somebody was able to somehow get in the tractor and drive through the floods to get to somewhere where they could get a signal. So it's those sorts of real day issues which I do know that the government is concerned about, and that's why I hope that discussions are ongoing with Ofcom and indeed BT, or Openreach I should say, in order to think that through. And I appreciate, Mr Mundell, we're discussing later today, although I'll be in the Treasury Select Committee, so cannot join, the issue about rural broadband. I think the same issue with Ofcom is still there about access to mobile signal. It's how increasingly a lot of people are wanting to use the internet, and the same request goes there too. And indeed, tomorrow there's a debate about the merger of Vodafone and Three. And I would strongly say I think that's a real opportunity for significant investment into having more transmitters right around the country. And I am concerned that some of what is being suggested, that Three being part of the Hutchison-Whampoa empire, is somehow dangerous to our country. Far from it, Mr Mundell. These are the same people who own Felixstowe Port. These are the same people who own Superdrug. These are the same people who own Green King. These are the same people who provide electricity for at least a third of the country. So I think in terms as we move forward in thinking of our infrastructure, I know that the government continues to have security at its heart. It took that action a few years ago when it decided to remove a certain supplier, Huawei, from an amount of the infrastructure in this country. But I think that we need to tread with confidence as we move forward. I wonder if my right honourable friend might be able to update us on what's happened elsewhere in Europe with the copper switch off. That's already been underway in Germany, Netherlands and Switzerland, and whether there are lessons that we can learn from there for those final communities that are quite hard to reach in that regard. I'm also conscious that it would be good to get some clarity. I've seen different years of when the switch off will happen. End of 2025 was one. I've seen more recently Openreach talking about 2027. So it'd be useful to get an update on exactly where we are on that. For what it's worth, I think that we should even consider asking them to push back until 2030. But I do accept that there has been Ofcom issued guidance a few years ago. I don't know if that's been updated. They issued advice initially in 2018, but I do want to give credit to BT and their digital voice migration. I think they have listened. They did pause the digital voice migration for a year, and in particular they've looked at how they're going to support people with a particular telecare device to which the right honourable gentleman referred, people who only have landlines today, people of a certain age, and indeed customers of mobile signal. But that comes back to my earlier point. We can't just trust, I'm afraid, the maps that Ofcom have put out. In terms of the power situation to which the honourable gentleman referred, right honourable gentleman referred, indeed, I think an hour is simply not enough. And okay, we might get something with 4 hours, but we need to work that through on how potentially we could have community hubs or similar. While I'm conscious that parts of Scotland are much bigger geographically, the constituency I represent, it's about 300 square miles. Our district council is the largest by population, stretching from Felixstowe to Lowestoft. But even then, we are pretty stretched as a rural county in Suffolk in that regard, and I hope that potentially there could be some further work that could be done there. In terms of the people who don't have an internet connection today, I appreciate that's getting less and less, but in terms of percentages still means hundreds of thousands of people. And while I'm conscious that the government, I believe, is required that people can get an internet-based line without having to take on a package, we need to make sure that the costs of that are just not escalated and escalated, so it becomes prohibitive to people who want to still have that security of a landline. Mr Mundell, this, I had hoped and assumed to some extent that Ofcom had really sorted this out a few years ago. I'm conscious that some of the issues the country's faced and The body check undertaken by COVID has really kind of knocked back some of these infrastructure projects, some of the other transition that we need to do. But I think it's important that that not just BT, not just Openreach, but Ofcom and the government listen carefully in terms of consumer protection and look for assurances that nobody will be left behind. This isn't just about trying to get everybody broadband. This is really about, as I say, making sure that people have the confidence of a lifeline, that when they pick up the phone, when they need help, or indeed this isolation that people suffer without being able to have that phone call, that we make sure that is guaranteed not only now but for generations to come. Thank you.